One battle turned the tide of war. We are the Spy-Fi guys, and this is Midway 2019.
Welcome to the Spy-Fi guys.
So I apologize to the universe for that.
Yes. Wow.
Justice for Dennison!
Is it though?
I laughed and then I hated myself for laughing.
Welcome to the Spy-Fi guys, where we cover spy facts, spy fiction, and everything in between. I'm Christian.
And I'm Zach.
That's right, we are covering Midway. You are not experiencing a weird sense of deja vu. This is the 2019 version of Midway, as opposed to the 1976 version that we covered about 2 months ago.
That's right, and to cover our World War II military intelligence movie, we have brought back our World War II military intelligence guest, ZJ.
Hello, great to be back.
Yeah, just to give you even more, sense of deja vu.
We recorded the last Midway episode a few weeks ago, and I've been polishing up on my history of Midway since then.
Ooh, all right.
Unfortunately, I don't know if I have a ton of new things to lend to this specific episode, but yes, it piqued my interest last time I was here, and I'm excited to do this one. So,
all right.
Very good. It'll be interesting to compare the two movies. I hope I remember the first one well enough.
I mean, I will say, I feel like having watched the first one gave me more context for some stuff that just gets mentioned offhandedly here. But
yes.
we'll get into that after we have our plot synopsis. Zach?
All right, so as always, we have our poetry plot synopses. I will get started with the haiku. Lots of CGI. Bruno saves the Enterprise. Giant has woken.
Plot synopsis.
Nice.
And then here is the limerick for Midway 2019. Leighton's team made a ballsy prediction, but he stuck to his guns with conviction. The Jays had the first punch, but we took them to lunch because Midway is our jurisdiction.
Ooh, I like that one a lot.
Nice.
Thank you. And then here is the real IMDb plot summary, which is very mid. I can't believe I never thought of that joke before.
Oh no, Zach. That is
What?
not the way to do it.
The way to do a dad joke. Okay, so here's the IMDb plot summary. The story of the Battle of Midway told by the leaders and the sailors who fought it.
It is a description, shall we say.
And it leaves out the airmen, but whatever.
Right, which is like the big focus of this movie.
Mm-hmm.
All right, so we start off this movie with an FDR speech. I like how all the production company logos are in sepia tone.
Oh, yeah. I didn't recognize any of them, which always bodes well.
There were Hong Kong ones, which was interesting.
Yeah.
But the movie also mentions that this is a true account of the events, which is a new one.
Right.
It's a new one. Yeah.
And of course, it's, the one single day that turned the tide, as we mentioned in our tagline before the opening credits.
There seem to be a lot of those.
And then we get the background of all this. I was like, are these curtains? Plants? What are we looking at? Bamboo, maybe? Like the very beginning.
Yeah, I was trying to figure that out too. I was also trying to figure out, I think that they were CGI, but I couldn't tell.
There was a lot of that in this movie.
There was a lot of that in this movie.
Maybe there were reeds, because we find out, there's snow. In my notes, I'm like, what am I looking at? And then we see someone trying to catch a duck from a pond with like a net in Tokyo.
It's December 1937. Ooh, Very interesting. Is Mo Berg going to show up?
Maybe. But yeah, so we have Leighton here, who's played by, oh goodness, what's his name?
Patrick Wilson.
That's the one.
How do you know Patrick Wilson, Christian? Is it Watchmen or is it The Conjuring?
Neither.
Really?
It is Phantom of the Opera. He plays Raoul.
Oh, wow. That's a cut. To me, he'll always be Night Owl.
Yeah, I mean, he was that, and then he was also obviously Orm, Ocean Master himself.
Well, that was much later.
Yeah, that's right. But like, it's just been funny because Phantom of the Opera, he looks quite young, and then to see him, sort of age into all these other roles, like, oh, that's weird.
It is, isn't it? How these actors grow up. You watch them grow up on screen. Christian Bale, Tom Cruise, etc.
I mean, even Henry Cavill. First time I saw him was Count of Monte Cristo playing the Count's son, and I was like, oh, that's baby
Wow.
Henry Cavill.
But yeah, so Patrick Wilson and his naval attachés are real buddy with these Japanese counterparts, which is interesting to see.
And apparently Leighton speaks Japanese, which would definitely help out later.
So they have the shindig, and they're talking rather frankly with each other. I was wondering if that could possibly be historically accurate, because I actually don't know whether naval attachés from countries that at this point are certainly strategic rivals would be talking this frankly about their national interests and how they differ.
But they wouldn't be permitted to give that kind of info out. Like, the most notable, of course, is when the Japanese fellow says, we're dependent on U.S. oil, but we want to become a rising power. It's like, It's a good part because at this point we've seen Pearl Harbor many times in movies, but this is the first one that actually explains why they did it. Even they didn't necessarily do a very good job explaining it, but they had something.
Right.
Something.
I will say, I know that there are records of communications between the American and British naval attachés, I believe. Or it's possible the British naval attaché in Washington and someone high up in the U.S. Navy, I believe. But they're just discussing others' war plans and how they're going. And they're like, but so basically they're talking to the British guy. And they know this because the British guy was sending back transcripts of these conversations, of course. Right. And the transcripts of the conversations are like, our guys say that the important thing is who gets to Bermuda first or something, or who gets to Halifax first. And the other guy's like, our guys say the same thing. And, just kind of like basically these countries were wargaming conflicts with each other. But the people who were in charge at that point knew that their countries weren't actually going to be going to war and that they were allies, and so would talk rather frankly about how these war games had played out.
Interesting.
I wish I remembered the exact context for that because I thought it was interesting. But I don't think that the United States and Japan would be exchanging.
No, not like that. Yeah. Leighton, and Yamamoto talking. Yeah, like you said, very, very conversationally. I like that. Apparently, Yamamoto's glass is filled with, instead of whiskey, it's filled with tea. That's an old trick he learned. Nationalists in Japan have targeted Yamamoto for assassination for being too moderate.
Interesting stuff. Very interesting. Would like the whole movie about that. But I like how he mentions the oil, like we said before, and he says, "Don't push us."
Some foreshadowing here.
Well, like I said, we never see the U.S. push them, but presumably they do off screen.
With the talk of all the oil and everything else. Why? I like the line. Nobody wants a war. Smash cut. 4 years later, world at war.
That's right.
And the U.S. is, still remaining neutral. We go to a carrier, which is the Enterprise, 170 miles west of Pearl Harbor.
What kind of plane was this, CJ? I like that.
The kind of plane that they're flying at the beginning. I assume it's an SPD. Dauntless.
Okay.
It's funny that you say that because we didn't really see many of them in the last.
No,
Midway.
We didn't.
Yeah, ZJ, don't listen to suspense. Did this movie do a better job with the plans and the ships?
It did. It also failed in interesting ways that I think were perhaps more due to budgetary concerns than anything else.
I'm curious.
I don't know how many high definition models of these planes they were allowed to make, but it was apparently seemed like it was one Japanese plane and 2 American planes, and then they just reused the models and didn't even change the tail numbers on them for most of the shots. The SPD itself was very accurate. It's not painted quite correctly for this time period, but it is painted correctly for the Midway time period, so it's not too bad, actually.
All right, so interesting. So we meet Dick Best, who's played by Ed Skrein. He's flying a plane with his radio man, James Murray. They're practicing landing without flaps. Is that a reference to Midway 1976?
I don't know that it is. I think that at the end, they probably have to... It's probably foreshadowing for the end of the film.
But the fact that all right, that was one of many big climactic moments, maybe too many climaxes in that movie of the, all right, his flaps aren't working and he's trying to land and then he blows up into a fireball.
Yep.
So like the fact that first scene with planes, Dick Best is practicing landing without flaps, like it's got to be some kind of reference.
It does kind of
Yeah.
remind me of Indiana Jones going for his gun in Temple of Doom, only to find it not there.
Yeah, even though that makes no chronological sense because Temple of Doom
Right.
happens a year earlier.
Yes, famous mistake.
Best is not only practicing landing without his flaps, but he's shutting down all sorts of instruments to practice. And he makes this amazing landing.
Yep.
I don't know that the physics work out on it, though. But you know what? I'm going with it.
Mm.
And then we also have Lieutenant Commander McCluskey, who's, the head of Bombing 6. And he is not amused. What's his actor's name?
So this guy's name is Luke Evans, but he really has he's just been like everywhere. He has one of those faces.
Yeah.
It's
he's
ridiculous.
I think he's in like one of the Musketeer movies. He's been in the Fast and Furious franchise. He's Gaston in the live action Beauty and the Beast. Yes, he's everywhere.
Good for him. So yeah, there's a funny mistake with the subtitles where he threatens Dick Best. He says, "You got to be careful. You're going to get court-martialed," and it's spelled like the marshal of a parade, not like martial arts. I thought that was.
I didn't catch that.
Yeah, so we get another part where the camera's on the elevator again. They're using the carrier
I did see
elevator.
that. That was nice. Yeah.
The CG wasn't necessarily the best.
The CGI early in the movie is kind of rough, I feel. Like it gets better.
Especially early on. I mean, maybe they had these Pearl Harbor shots and they didn't have the budget to make them quite as...
Yeah, well, let's get to it. So we meet Lieutenant Dickinson, who is a friend of Dick Best's, and he's being sent to Pearl Harbor with the whole squadron, but they're holding back Scouting 6, which is what Best is at this point, part of at this point.
Mm-hmm.
And we go to the Arizona. We see the attack.
Yes, the attack is on. And guys, I just gotta say, I'm officially overseeing the Pearl Harbor attack in movies. I never want to see it again.
Well, I mean, okay, so we've seen it twice. Pearl Harbor, Tora Tora Tora. This movie, they don't actually show it in Midway 1976, do they?
No, they don't, and I'm fine with that.
Yeah. Is there any other movies that we could think of that they actually did show it? I don't think so.
Midway 1976 actually reused a shot of the attack of Pearl Harbor for the attack on Midway Island itself. So we do actually see the distinctive...
Fair enough.
USS Arizona cage mast in the background of one of those shots.
Well, okay.
Despite them not actually showing the attack.
I see. Well, 3 times is enough for me. So I guess observations on the attack. The planes seem very low.
I mean...
DJ, I don't know if you want to weigh in on that.
Yeah, the action shots in this movie seemed over the top to me. And it's sort of hard for me to explain exactly why. I came up with some specific examples through the movie. But I think that in this case, it would be all the bullets flying everywhere. You just see, I think, way more bullets than you probably would have seen in reality. They keep dropping tons of bombs everywhere. In reality, I think most of the U.S. ships were hit by torpedoes rather than by bombs.
Yeah, the Arizona is definitely the one that was hit by a dive bomb. But other than that,
yes,
I think you're right, actually.
Yeah. So for my observation, I was reminded of the movie Pacific Rim.
Okay.
Where it's like that kind of CGI. I feel like the scene was very low energy.
Oh, yeah.
I don't know about you guys.
I think they just need to. What they're trying to do is just remind people, but without going through the entire attack all over again. Because hey, we've already had a movie that did that. We've had multiple movies that did that.
I would have preferred they just skip the attack altogether, personally, but I think I made that clear. A couple of other things. There's a part where someone's pants get lit on fire. Do you remember this part?
Yes, a kid who's with Best's best friends or his roommate at the academy, and they're trying to throw there's a ship next to him. I don't know what ship was next to the Arizona, but they throw a rope across, and the kid gets his hands burned and is shimmying across. And then as he's shimmering across, the rope gets caught on fire, and then so he has to climb up the rest of it, and that's when his pants get lit on fire. And the other guy's putting him out with his hands.
Right, but the reason why I bring it up is because the fire looked rather fake.
Yeah, no, all of the fire in that was not great. I agree with you there.
Yeah, the part where they're hanging on the rope and behind them is just a wall of fire. That didn't look so good either. And I was like, oh boy. is this going to be the movie? Is this what the effects are going to look like the whole time? But
Yeah.
it improved later.
Yeah. Yeah, so also throughout this, we see, a mother and a child, like, watching the attack as it happens across the way. We also see Leighton at home. He gets a call, and someone picks him up to bring him in.
I think for me, maybe it was the moment where he's climbing across the rope as Japanese Zeros try to strafe him, where I thought that was maybe a little over the top.
Just a little bit.
Did it feel like a video game? It felt like a video game.
Yeah, it did. Well, I've seen video games with better graphics.
Where Dickinson actually does encounter the Japanese in his plane.
Oh yeah, that's right. There's a fight.
And he's like, his radio guy / gunner dies on him, and he has to bail out. And I have a note here. It says, this definitely looks like it was filmed at Ford Island, but I've been wrong before.
I think I saw somewhere that this was filmed in Hawaii.
I think,
In fact, I think it becomes not a problem, but a bit of an inaccuracy, because the Marshall Islands are pretty darn flat.
Yeah.
And then in the next major scene, when they attack the Marshall Islands, they're flying through all these canyons and stuff that that don't exist on the island.
Okay, so it was actually filmed in Hawaii. It was also filmed in Montreal.
Oh,
interesting.
Sounds cost effective.
They get the message that Pearl's under attack, but then we also have Leighton arriving at HQ. Who was the admiral before Nimitz? Or the Pacific commander before Nimitz? CJ, do you know?
Husband
That's
Kimmel,
right, Kimmel, who was in Pearl Harbor.
Yeah.
That's right, he's the one
who nearly gets hit by a bullet and then says, it would have been better if it had killed me.
Oh, yeah, that was in Tora Tora Tora.
That's right, yeah. He says to Leighton as he comes in, here's the man who tried to warn us.
That's right. I also like how Dick Best has the photo of his wife and kid in the cockpit. What a cliche. But I still liked it.
Admiral Halsey is played by Dennis Quaid, so nice to see him here. He's always a fun appearance.
Yeah, a much rougher Admiral Halsey than the last one.
Yeah. We also get a few sort of appearance of, that guy. Well, not really that guy's, but hey, it's Darren Criss, who was in Glee and among many other things. But, I always feel a kinship to him because he's part Filipino, and he grew up in Hawaii, and he was also in Michigan at around the same time I was.
Oh, wow.
And I never ran across him, actually. So I was like, oh, that, surprising. But yeah, but he is one of the other pilots, one of the torpedo pilots. He's the lead torpedo pilot whose name I forget.
Oh, the one who has a rivalry?
Yeah. Best, wants to go in with a bomb, but instead they're assigned to give a smoke screen while the torpedoes attack.
Yeah, and I hope I'm not stealing anybody's spy fact versus fiction. Dick Best is like, they're not going to work, and someone says, you don't know that. He's like, yeah, you're right, we don't know that because they've never been tested. It's like, what? Oh my god.
So that's a reference to the famous issues that the US had with their torpedo detonation systems, which for both submarines and torpedo bombers basically did not work for the first 2 years of the war. And so it's actually quite accurate that when we do get to the torpedo attacks later, they do nothing, because they're firing weapons that need to only work in certain conditions, and that literally are the Japanese accounts do talk about these torpedoes hitting ships and bouncing off of them. Yes, and the Bureau of Ordnance insisted that the torpedoes worked well because they had tested them under this specific condition and it worked, and so they refused to test them under more varied conditions, and as a result, the U.S. torpedoes did not get fixed until, I think, 1943 or 44.
Okay. So Leighton gives a report to Kimmel, and then Kimmel says, make sure that the next man in this chair listens to you.
That's right.
A lot of pressure.
So Best and the other pilots, arrive where they hear that the fleet has been spotted, but they don't find anything. Apparently they were north instead of south. Yeah.
A good sign, the CGI improves. But the planes flying around in formation, those look really good.
Yeah. Darren Chris's character's name was Lindsay. That's right. So there's some conflict between Best and Lindsay. They're low on fuel, and Best tells Lindsay to, bring his torpedo guys back to Pearl and don't try to land on the Enterprise. But Lindsay decides to go for it anyways, and one of his men almost torpedoes the Enterprise.
Yep.
Yeah. So Enterprise returns back to Pearl Harbor. They see all the devastation. This is one of many moments. Well, not many. A few moments where I'm like, I kind of wish there was a Ben Affleck and Josh Hartnett cameo here.
Yeah, sure. Like they have the budget for that.
Okay, maybe these guys aren't, Ben Affleck or there may be.
How much can
I was
Josh
gonna say
Hartnett
Josh
cost in
Hartnett.
2019?
At this time,
But do it as a favor.
yeah, before he was, starting to have his comeback and supporting an Oppenheimer. Yeah, he was doing a lot of small indie stuff right now. But yeah, like there's a scene on, they can see people in the distance, trying to cut through the hull of Oklahoma. Well, we know that in the movie Pearl Harbor, they were up there cutting, trying to help the people cut through. So I was like, oh, that'd be fun.
That's right.
I do appreciate. I think this is the first time in one of
Yeah.
these movies that they haven't just shown modern U.S. ships sitting in Pearl Harbor. The ships that I identified were period accurate.
Nice. ZJ, how would you feel? And actually, Zach too. It's like, I don't know how to, there's no reason to this, but like a World War II cinematic universe, if you had like basically the long running series of World War II movies dealing with different parts of the war, different campaigns and different theaters. But whenever you have someone say play Halsey, it's always the same guy or something like that.
It'd be interesting. There'd be a lot of pressure on that.
That's true. That is true.
And he gets older as the movies go by.
I don't think it would work. I mean, like, I don't think people would be rushing out to see this. But I was like, it would be fun for me. Like, if, for example, once we get Doolittle, if it actually been played by Alec Baldwin, he was like, oh, that'd been fun. Although I don't, one that was like 18 years before this movie, so the ages wouldn't quite work out.
I really do like the idea of a World War II cinematic universe. That sounds pretty bananas. Yeah. But also, I feel like it would be tough though, because a lot of these films, you see one guy kind of acting in one way, and that's for the narrative purpose of that movie, and then he'd show up later and be like a different character, like how we saw Genda in multiple films, or the portrayal of Nagumo in different situations, or that sort of thing.
We find out that the guy who we were following on the Arizona was Dick Best's roommate from the academy, Roy Pierce. Best also finds Dickinson, and also the woman who was with her daughter watching before. That is Best's wife, Anne, played by Mandy Moore.
Right.
So we see Best trying to find Roy. He sees the kid who went across the rope in the hospital, but the kid doesn't know what happened to Roy. And this is terrifying. The the doctor.
Yeah, he gets turned into charcoal.
Well, no, not just that, but like he said, we're working as hard as we can to identify these folks, but people are bringing body parts in pillowcases. Like, oh my god.
Yeah, it's pretty wild. But again, I'm like, we don't need all this. This isn't a movie about Pearl Harbor.
I thought it set up the stakes for him.
Yeah.
I thought it was good. Also sets up kind of the conflict that his wife feels about this. He's this ace pilot, but he's also being thrown over and over again into these dangerous situations as a result. Then I think one thing that is interesting about naval combat to me is just kind of the sheer scale of the weapons that are used against each other. If you're fighting on a ground war, often the largest weapons that'll be fired are 4 inches or 6 inches. Might be one of the largest guns that could be fired in that context. These are, you'll have pretty regularly in naval combat, 14-inch shells hitting each other, or these 1,000-pound bombs, or just kind of and the magazine on the Arizona detonates, and so just kind of the sheer scale of devastation in these battles is kind of almost unique in some ways to naval warfare, I think. So it kind of captured a little bit of that, just kind of how devastating these fights actually are at a your human level, I guess.
That's right.
Yeah. So here's my question about this. So he finds Roy's body by saying, "Oh, he would have been wearing his ring from our class in Annapolis." How many people would have had Annapolis class rings? Like, I mean, the class sizes are not small, but they're not ginormous. But still, I feel like there might have been more than one body at Pearl with an Annapolis class ring.
Oh, that's true.
How large would an Annapolis graduating class have been?
I have no
guess?
idea. That's a good question.
But it would have been a class ring from a specific year. Probably,
True,
right?
true.
So,
But that
it's an
narrows it
interesting
down a
question,
little
though,
bit. Maybe I don't know.
don't
I was
actually
like,
know.
just maybe it's I don't know if he knew. Oh, that was his watch too, or something. It was like, but the ring, like just the ring, I was like, that seems a little thin to just say, oh, that's definitely the body, and it's burned beyond recognition. We hear audio of the FDR speech, famous one.
That's right.
And we hear it on a radio in Japan where Yamamoto is listening to it.
Yeah, and then he gives his famous lines. There's famous lines
Yes.
getting thrown all over the place.
But they actually include the second part of the quote, which I should have written down.
And filled him with a terrible.
Yeah, that's the
resolve
one. Yeah.
Oh,
Yeah.
yeah, that's right. I thought there was more to it after that.
You just usually hear the sleeping giant, not the filled him with a terrible resolve part. So I was like, oh, that's nice. So Yamamoto is reporting to the War Office. He's discussing with, I think this is Yamaguchi, whether or not to remove Nagumo, because I don't remember why. But then, they says Yamamoto says, no, we can't have this infighting within, the Navy. We must be united against the Army.
That's great. We need to focus on our real enemies, our own country's army.
Yeah. Also, we get a quick introduction here of Admiral Nimitz, played by Woody Harrelson.
Yes, that's right. I was wondering when he was going to show up, and I was like, oh, okay, cool. We got a famous actor to be Nimitz.
Nimitz was in Midway 76, right?
Oh, yeah, totally.
Well, I can't picture him now, but it's like, growing up in Hawaii, especially, most of my life near Pearl Harbor, I was like, there's a Nimitz Highway. I was like, I never really thought, oh, that's definitely who it's named after. But, some stuff you just never think of because when you're driving down it all the time.
Yeah, I think in Midway 1976, he was just a kind of generic old white guy and not a famous actor.
Not Woody Harrelson. Well, he may have been famous in his day, but we don't know. Yeah. We have the Japanese war room meeting, and they're told we need to knock out their carriers. I don't know if I like the switching back and forth between Nimitz meeting with the CNO and also the Japanese war room meeting. It's like stick to one. It's easier to make for my notes at least.
Well, I mean, they've done that in all the other movies that we've seen.
I know, but the fact is, like every other couple words, they're just switching back and forth. Like that's a little much.
Fair enough.
Also, here's like, like in the Japanese war room meeting, is that Tojo? Is that Hideki Tojo in there? That's speaking from the army.
I think so.
It probably was. He looked pretty distinctive.
And maybe I'm completely wrong. Is like I feel like you always see portrayals of Hitler. You never really see much, or Stalin, for example, but you never really see Tojo portrayed by in movies, or at least in American movies.
I think you probably did a lot more during the war.
Probably.
Because I feel like he kind of became the face of a lot of U.S. propaganda.
That's why I was sort of surprised I haven't seen, like, at least to my knowledge, I haven't seen much of him in things, whereas I've definitely seen, obviously, lots of portrayals of Hitler or Stalin. I'm trying to think how many portrayals of Mussolini I've actually seen. I can't say that I've seen many now that I think about it.
That's right. Well, I, of course, remember the great part in the Pacific where Eugene Sledge misses his practice mortar shot. So it's like, how could you mess it up? How could you mess it up? Tojo and Fuckface over there are going to keep hosing our line. And it shows two dummies, and one of them's named Tojo, and the other one's named Fuckface.
Also, I like here, Tadanobu Asano is Admiral Yamaguchi. Okay, you may remember him from as one of the Warriors 3 in the Thor movies.
Yeah.
And I believe he's in the new Shogun show as well, which I haven't watched, but it's on my list.
Yeah, I think he's a pretty major character in that one. So
the CNO tells Nimitz what's the situation. The U.S. is on the back foot, and Nimitz is given the Commander-in-Chief Pacific Fleet job.
That's right.
So we have a lot of funerals happening at the same time. We see Best and Anne, see Roy Pierce's wife, who's like leaving Hawaii. We also get, at a bar, a bunch of the pilots are toasting to Roy. What's his name? Best is telling you a story time about drunk walking about trying to steal, a keg of beer from Canada, and their boat getting stuck. It was a fun story.
I mean, I guess, but it's like, we don't know this character. It's like, come on, let's move this along here. I haven't got all day.
It's supposed to tell you more about Dick best than it is really about his friend. Just like the fact that he had good friends and loyal friends like that.
Yeah, which is good because
Yeah, and I think we needed some level of characterization of the characters as well, because as it is, the movie came in at a rather economical for a war
Yeah.
film, 2 hours and
Something
12
like that.
minutes or
Yeah.
something.
yeah, how do we feel about Dick Best, by the way?
It's
He's a
I'm
lot.
like I'm torn because he's kind of flat, but he's also got that sort of cocky pilot down, especially of the era. He's got that persona down pat.
Sure. I didn't like his face. I'm just gonna say it. I didn't like his
Wow.
face. Okay? He looked like a bully from a 1980s movie.
I thought he looked like Cillian Murphy.
Killian.
Whichever.
Cillian Murphy.
I can see as a resemblance to Killian Murphy. Yeah.
I liked him. I thought he really we've often seen a lot of wooden portrayals or ones that just feel like, there's some famous actor thrown into these, and because I think that's how a lot of these 1960s and 70s movies were filmed. He really felt like he was acting, I guess. I don't know. Like maybe he didn't feel like he was acting. So I appreciated it. I felt like I bought him in his character. So
Yeah, fair enough. Dick and Dickinson are, after the Irish wake, basically they're drunk walking home, and they notice, they first they think it's like shore patrol, and then realize that nope, that's the CIC's, car, and they shout at Nimitz's car.
Yeah, they're like, let's go get him.
When are you gonna let us at him, Nimitz?
That's right.
So Leighton meets with Nimitz for the first time, says that he wants to be reassigned to a destroyer. Nimitz knows who Leighton is, and is like, oh, well, this is the greatest intelligence failure in American history for
So
now.
far. Yeah, so far.
So he doesn't want to be known as the man who was responsible for that. But Nimitz says, no, we need you. I need you to get into Yamamoto's head, find out what he's going to do next. And he says, you know what? All right, we're on the back foot. Now we need to throw a punch.
Did you guys also the part with the psychological evaluation of Yamamoto?
Yeah.
I thought that was neat.
what part with the psychological evaluation?
There's just a part where I remember, I think Leighton is like, my analyst did a psychological evaluation of him, but I don't remember what their conclusions were.
It might have been later in the movie.
Possibly a little bit later.
Okay. Nimitz is assigning Halsey to attack the Marshall Islands. But is it a trap? ?
That's right.
So McCluskey is giving the briefing for the attack. The carriers are 2,000 miles away. They do the attack. Here's where we get one of the dud torpedoes.
Yeah, this was a very exciting attack because I didn't know anything about it, unlike the Pearl Harbor attack and unlike the Doolitte Raid, which they also do again in this movie. I didn't know what was going to happen. So I was like, whoa, this is interesting. What's going to happen?
Yeah, so they spot a second airfield, and they need to take it out.
Cool, because it's like they weren't expecting to have to do it, and then suddenly they have to save the Enterprise. Suddenly they're the ones at risk. Oh, wow, interesting.
And Best goes in for a dive bomb, which is really exciting.
Yes. The first time. First of many times.
I do think that this scene, again, for me, was kind of an example of, I don't like it when they over the top this stuff even more, where they're like, oh, there's 12 bombers they're all about to take off, and then there's a battleship in the harbor, and there's all this stuff that is just, it wouldn't have been okay if it was just a destroyer in the harbor, and maybe he bombs 2 planes instead of 18 or however many there were on the ground. It feels so like everything is turned up to 11 all the time in these, when sometimes it could be, an 8, and that would be okay too. But anyway, I just wish that every once in a while he would bomb something that didn't blow up absolutely everything, which wouldn't be historically accurate later. He did bomb everything that blew up, but earlier on, like you can bomb an airfield and have it hit, like a barn or something. Not 12 planes warming up to bomb your ship. Anyway.
ZJ, I wanted to ask you this. I guess I'll ask you it now. About the anti-aircraft fire. The way the movie portrays it, it's like, how did anyone ever survive it?
Yeah, I think that that's a little over the top relative to how it would have actually been. particularly for some of these situations like the dive bombing, where oftentimes kind of it would have been difficult for crews to accurately focus on these planes to begin with. Because a lot of hitting planes is leading the targets correctly, and when a plane is diving directly at you, it's actually really hard to evaluate where it's going to be at that point that you need to shoot, because the angles are so oblique that it's really easy to miss. I don't know. Yeah, so that seemed was another thing that seemed really over the top to me. Is everyone's constantly melting to anti-aircraft fire. I think that, as an example, a lot of the losses among the SBDs were due to zeros after they dropped their bombs.
Okay. Rather than the anti-aircraft fire.
Yeah. So when they're in their dives, actually, one of the advantages of a dive bomber is when it's in its dive, it's very difficult to hit.
Right, because you're only showing that much of target to them.
Right.
Yeah, and it would be also difficult for a fighter to intercept it once it's in its dive as well. So just little small things like that kind of felt like they could have made it slightly differently, and I don't think it would have hurt the film. But anyway, yeah, that's a great question though, Zach, because I don't actually I do think that there's footage from gun cameras on planes and stuff during attacks that probably would help give a very accurate picture of what that would be like. Probably worth noting that by maybe mid-1943, probably 4 Japanese aviators attacking U.S. fleets, that may have been what their experience would have been like at that point, because the U.S. anti-aircraft fire about a year after this in the war would have been just absolutely withering with the new ships coming online and stuff. So I don't know. Anyway.
But yeah, so we go back to the Enterprise, where their bombers are attacking the Enterprise, and hey, is that Nick Jonas?
Yeah, I knew Jonas was going to show up. I saw that.
He's playing Bruno Guido, or it's Guido, not Guido.
Yeah. No.
And they notice that one of the planes is downed, or one of the Japanese bombers is downed, but it's turning itself into a bomb, and it's going to try to ram or hit the Enterprise. And Bruno runs into a plane that's on the deck, uses a tail gun to shoot it down, and as he shoots it down, when it misses the deck, it takes off the tail end of the Dauntless that he was in.
Ooh, another exciting part, kind of like the suicide bomber scene in Zero Dark 30, because I didn't know what was about to happen.
Yeah. So that was a fun, exciting part. And then immediately afterwards, Halsey wants to see Bruno, and he gets promoted on the spot.
That's right, to an engineer's mechanic mate first class. You're fine.
So we are at an officers' club, presumably in Hawaii, where Dick Best and his wife Anne are meeting McCluskey and Dickinson for drinks. And as when Best goes to get some drinks from the bar, and like point blank asks McCluskey why isn't he commanding a squadron of his own. And I like this, that she's no niceties here. It's like, all right, I know my husband, I know his worth, I know his value. Why isn't he commanding a squadron?
It's funny how even in the midst of the war and this fate of civilization is at stake, people are still worried about their careers.
Well, it's not just his career; it's also it's where he would be best placed, because he's the best pilot.
That's right.
Also, here we have Best seeing Leighton at the bar. They apparently know each other. I was like, I didn't look. I was like, did they actually know each other? I'm curious.
I don't know. That seemed like it would have been just a crossover for the sake of the movie. But I'm curious as well. I don't know. I couldn't come across anything that said he was friends with them, but I also didn't look very hard.
Yeah.
So. Oh, this is but one of my most nitpicky things that I was watching.
Let's hear it.
I happen to know that the Mai Tai wasn't invented until later.
Whoa! And
he orders 2 Mai Tais, and yeah.
And how do you know that?
I've watched a YouTube video about the history of the Mai Tai.
Let's see. It is 1944. Yeah, and Trader Vic's.
And I think it didn't make its way to Hawaii until 47 or something after the war.
Not even that. 53. Yeah.
Yeah.
Wow. Huh. I didn't even catch that. That's interesting to know. Yeah.
Is it? I hope it's a little bit.
I do find that interesting, actually.
I guess to me it kind of speaks to a lot of the stuff in Hollywood films. They're like, we need him to order some kind of tropical
Yeah.
drink. He's going to order a Mai Tai.
Yeah.
And,
well, I mean, when was the pina colada invented?
yeah, there you go.
Now I have to know, actually. When was the pina colada invented? That's a Puerto Rican drink. So, 19th century, there you go.
Right.
1922 in Travel Magazine, 24 in National Geographic. So it was around. So he could have been drinking a pina, or ordered a pina colada for his wife.
Yeah, sure. There you go.
But yeah, so we learned that they both have kids. Dick Best has a kid. So it's not a full pilot stereotype.
I don't think that Leighton has a kid, or at least not that we know of. We know he has a wife.
Yeah.
Oh, okay. I see that. So then we get a speech to the replacements.
Yes.
Which was great.
Mm-hmm.
But I wanted more, but they get cut off.
They got to cut off because, we get the classic, you got to see this. And what is it? It's Army planes on Navy carriers. It's the Doolitte Raid again.
Yeah, that kind of made me groan.
I mean,
see it again.
And this, this is the moment where I was like, this really is Pearl Harbor 2.0, isn't it? It's really just thinking, all right, Pearl Harbor did, all before the attack and a little bit after. We're going to take the middle part of the attack and then everything after.
Yeah, so.
Yep. Well, you got to structure your World War II narratives in specific ways to hit the right narrative beats.
Yeah.
And
there you go.
Yeah.
But I did like how Aaron Eckhart is Doolittle.
Yeah. Couldn't get Alec Baldwin.
Yeah, I also wondered when are they getting to Midway? The movie's called Midway.
This is also another good place for a Ben Affleck and Josh Hartnett cameo.
You know what I would have done is I would have I don't even remember their names. Have some other actors be like,
oh, Danny and Rafe, yeah.
It's like, Rafe, you think they could do it? I don't know, Danny.
Man, see, actually, I would have really loved that.
But they would have had to toss their based on true events.
Right, yeah. Just obviously, just like in, Pearl Harbor and in the real life events of Doolitte Raid, they get picked up or the carriers get spotted by enemy planes, so they need to launch now.
That's right.
Enemy fishing trawlers.
Oh, is that it? Not planes. Okay. Thanks for the correction. Doolittle makes a speech about, the first enemy in Japan's history to hit their home territory. Is this true?
Yeah, I think it's true. Right, CJ?
I thought that.
What about Genghis Khan?
Didn't his ship sink, or did
I
he
have
land?
no idea.
Oh,
I was like,
yeah.
This seems too good to be true.
Like ever? No,
yeah,
it's not.
It's a quote that's good enough for
there
government.
You go. Okay.
I'm offended by that. But yeah, jumping ahead to the Spy Fact versus Fiction, it was the first time they had been attacked on home islands in like hundreds of years.
Okay, so yeah. No. Sorry if I ruined your Spy Fact, but like that just stuck up and say that can't be right.
So,
yeah, I don't think the Russians got to them in 1905.
Yeah, so while we're doing a preview of Spy Fact versus Fiction, by the way, I also wanted to say the way they show us the Doolittle Raid is very cool, where they have the sailors listening to Tokyo Rose.
Yeah.
And then Tokyo Rose starts getting bombed, which was great, but it was also wrong. According to my source, which I will reveal later, she wasn't broadcasting in 1942. She didn't start until the next year.
Oh, interesting. Yeah. So we also we see Best and the other pilots from the Enterprise watching them take off. Z and Best make a bet on whether they actually make it off the plane off the deck, and the way they portray show the launch, and thankfully we only see one plane take off. It's not like Pearl Harbor we see all of them taking off. We just see Doolittle's plane, his ZJ type of plane. Is it a B-17?
B-25.
B-25. Okay.
The Mitchell bomber.
That's right. B-25. But I like how, when it takes off, there is like a splash of mist, and so they don't see it actually take off. And then it just bursts through the mist, and it's nice.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, they did a good job.
Yeah. So we also see, the Emperor, while the attacks are happening, they need to get him to safety. And yeah, you see Doolittle bombing Tokyo, and then they get out of there.
That's right.
So Leighton is at home. He has top secret documents. His wife takes his glasses. No, you need to come to bed. He's like, well, he explains what's going on with the Doolittle Raiders. And he's just like, can I do anything for them? No, but will I regret not trying everything? Yes.
Right.
But yeah, so we get now's where we get where the Doolittle Raiders, at least on Doolittle's plane, we see him and his men bail out. And I was like, wow, we're sticking with this. We're that's interesting.
They're spending a lot of time with it. I didn't
Yeah.
love that.
So we have Yamaguchi meeting Yamamoto on his ship. Yamamoto is depressed because he thinks he personally endangered the Emperor.
Yeah, the Emperor is a bunker. You know what?
Uh,
Not gonna say it. I don't want them to come after me. They get him into a bunker. And I was like, okay, they're getting out, and then we get Hiroshima Bay with the Japanese fleet. I was like, all right, now we're getting somewhere.
Yeah. So we also see that Tojo says, sends a message to Yamamoto to finish Coral Sea and then focus on Midway. Dun dun dun. Is that the title drop?
I think so.
Yeah. All right. So next we get Doolittle landing in China. It's like, wow, we are still sticking with this.
Yeah, I like the reveals where he meets the people and they can't talk to him, and it's scary. It's what's going to happen. Then he meets someone who speaks English.
Yeah.
He helps him out, but he's not out of the woods. So I did find it interesting. It's just spending a lot of time with it.
Yeah. So we have the Nimitz sending the Enterprise to join Yorktown and Lexington at Coral Sea. And this is where Leighton says, he heard a theory from one of his best men that Coral Sea is just a warm-up.
Yeah.
Mm.
And we have even more Doolittle. What's going on with this movie?
Right.
And so the planes are bombing China, but he's like, wait, why are they bombing you? There's no installations here. What's the target? People are the target. Ooh.
Yeah. I mean, it's sad. I'm glad they had this, but they spend a lot of time with it, and then it just stops.
Yeah.
They don't. It doesn't end
for a long time. It's like, oh, and then that.
I feel like this might have been one of those things where they imagine it taking being a longer, more fleshed out arc, and then it gets cut, and then cut, and then cut, and then you're left with just Aaron Eckhart bombing and then crashing, and then
a brief thing with the Chinese, but then it just ends. It just stops.
I was wondering whether this section would have been, would it have been targeted at more of a Chinese audience,
interesting,
or something? Kind of more of a tie-in to the connection between the U.S. and China at that point.
Well, it was partially made in Hong Kong, but then you'd think there'd be, I don't know how they would do it in a World War II movie, but to do a Pacific Rim or a Transformers thing where you have Chinese main characters, I guess they weren't willing to go that far to pander.
Yeah. We are at Coral Sea. The Enterprise was too late, and now it's only them and the Hornet are left as carriers.
Mm-hmm.
That's right. We see some damage to the Yorktown, which I liked.
Yeah. Halsey wants to talk to McCluskey and Best. We start to see his rash.
Yeah, and the rash is portrayed more scary in this one, as opposed to annoying, which it was in 1976.
So McCluskey is now made as the head of the air group, and Best is now in charge of bombing 6.
Yeah, I like that our heroes get promoted into critical parts of the organization.
Cut back to Yamamoto, where he enters a room as they're carrying out a war game, and here's some foreshadowing.
Yes,
because the commander who was wargaming as the Americans, rather than having the carriers come from Pearl, instead he had them positioned at northwest of Midway. But that can't happen because the Americans don't know we're coming. Run it again with the carriers coming from Pearl.
Yeah. So what's interesting to me is that historically speaking, Nagumo knew that there was always a chance that American carriers could be there. And when they don't reference that in this, but when he was launching his attacks on Midway, he retained something like half of his aircraft in case carriers were spotted and he needed to launch a strike immediately. And part of the problem was that the carriers were spotted, and I think that they went into this in the other film, the carriers were spotted just as the other planes were returning from their attack on Midway. And so they weren't able to turn around and get these planes launched. He had to land the other ones first, and then the attack came just as they're rearming these aircraft for this attack. So it just kind of it was the worst possible timing for poor Nagumo, who, as far as I can tell, historically tried to be prepared for this eventuality and wasn't just headstrong and ignoring it. So
there you go. No plans for us contact with the enemy.
Yeah, first contact with the enemy then is the line.
You go.
Yeah,
I do appreciate that the younger folks, the younger officers, anticipated that.
Yeah,
really figured it out.
Go back to Pearl, where Washington intel guys think that Leighton is wrong. They're not going to attack Midway. Instead, they're going to, Japanese will send their forces back into the Coral Sea. Leighton's like, no, Midwest is a step towards Hawaii and the West Coast. So Nimitz is like, all right, we better visit Station Hypo, and I need to meet your men, your guy who's giving you this intel.
I mean, Washington is wrong for the second time. Stop listening to them.
Yeah. So Leighton warns Nimitz about Rochefort that he's a little eccentric.
Which he wasn't, as we determined last time, but whatever.
I mean, they don't make him that eccentric in this one.
And the other one, it was even more so.
Yeah.
I guess I can see why everyone would assume that.
Yeah. So I like we get a nice, Nimitz comes in and tension on deck, and everyone's like, what? So they're looking for Rochefort. I like this. I have no idea if the accuracy of this, and maybe you have this in Spy Factor Suspicion. The fact that most of the men down there were on the band of the California.
I don't know.
I like that. I believe that was true. That they would have conscripted a bunch of these guys from, not conscripted obviously, but they would have enlisted. Not quite the right word either.
Reassigned.
Anyway, yes. And the California, of course, was one of the was one of the battleships that was hit in Pearl Harbor, and so they don't have much use for the band on the California in particular. So I believe that that's true.
Oh, interesting. Okay, so Rochefort is again in a bathrobe, and this time we get an explanation. It gets freezing cold down here.
That's right, and it's another that guy, like a guy with a really familiar looking face, is the one who plays Rochefort. But I could never figure out where I knew him from.
Let's see. Rochefort is played by Brennan Brown.
Okay.
He is on. He was in Man in the High Castle.
That might have been it. Yeah, I think he is the man on the High Castle, actually.
Oh, okay.
No, I don't know.
Oh, I don't know. That's the only thing I recognize. He was on a couple of episodes of Person of Interest.
Okay.
That might be it. That may be the most famous thing he's been in.
That's probably it then.
And he's like popping pills or something when we meet him.
Oh, I missed that. I didn't see that.
He like pops pills and then sticks them back in his drawer. Like they focus on it.
Okay, weird.
The camera on it.
Yeah.
I don't know if he's like supposed to be taking amphetamines or something so that he can keep going. But
so we have the whole thing with AF.
Nimitz is trying to figure out how this all works, and apparently, it's okay. We can read about a quarter of their communications, but not exactly, just a quarter of each thing. It's a lot of in fragments. Nimitz is trying to get to the bottom of what's the disagreement with DC. Okay, we agree the target is called AF. We disagree where it is. And I like this line from Rochefort. It's like, okay, imagine you're throwing a wedding. And maybe I've never seen the invitation, but I hear that from the caterers that they have an event on a certain date. The flower guy is buying up all the roses on the island. The best band is booked. That's what Signo's intelligence could give you. Clues, not definitive answers. And at this point, I'm thinking, it's like, all right, is it a requirement for any of these, military... these World War II movies where there's a military intelligence factor, that they have to have one pretty good line about how this all works? Like there was this in this one. There was it was okay one, also from Rochefort and Midway, and then there's the one that I really like from Pearl Harbor. That's by what's his face from Ghostbusters.
Dan Aykroyd.
It is Dan Aykroyd. Yeah. But like, is it a requirement that they always just have to explain how good military intel is in these movies with just one good line like that?
Yeah, I think that these good analogies can actually really help. I thought that this was a fun explanation, and was also a good one, kind of explaining how can you piece this together when you're not reading all the messages. Well, yeah. Anyway,
explanation was for the audience as well as for Nimitz, which I appreciate.
Yeah.
Yes, absolutely.
But yeah, so they need to convince DC that the target is Midway. And so they're going to do that somehow. We also see that Halsey's rash is getting worse, and he gets an eyes-only message from Pearl. They want the Enterprise to be spotted. That way they can break standing orders from DC and return to Pearl Harbor.
That's
So
right.
that was a fun little bit of trickery there.
Yeah,
Yep.
it's tricking everybody. They do the freshwater trick, which is funny because with all the explanations for the SIGINT, they go
Yeah.
through the freshwater thing kind of fast.
Yeah.
and they act like it was almost an accident. Obviously,
Well,
it wasn't.
it was.
but-
It's like a wink, wink, nudge, nudge.
Yeah.
Thing. I was like, I appreciated in Midway 1976 that they actually lay it out for the
Yeah.
audience and say, all right, this is how we know that they can read this code, so we're gonna send out this message that says the freshwater supply is out, and then see if they pick up on that. So I appreciated it more, and so I think because we saw that for previous one, we as the audience are good. Okay, we know what's going on, but for everyone else, like that's a little. You could have gone more into that.
Yeah, it seemed like a weird way to present it when
Yeah.
clearly it was a deliberate action, and I
Uh-huh.
liked the way that we saw it in the other one.
Yeah.
The other Midway. I think that one of my favorite parts in the other Midway too is where the guy's like, "Wait a minute, I'm supposed to translate this message, but it's not true." And the guy's like,
Yeah.
"Whatever."
Yeah, we just want more spy stuff because this is a spy podcast.
Yeah. We said, this proves that Midway is AF, and now they need to know the attack date and how many ships. And we get to Midway Island, where director John Ford arrives.
This is the best movie ever. It has a John Ford cameo.
Yeah. He's planning to make a movie there, and a friend of his in the Navy said that he'll see some action there. It's like, I think I got fed a load of bull.
Mhm.
And, halfway through this movie, we finally get to Midway.
That's
Yeah.
right. Though, as much as I love the John Ford plotline, he just disappears.
Yeah.
It's not a story. It's just these little scenes. But what are you gonna do?
That's pretty common in these war epics. Is they've got references to real things that happen, and you end up with people who are in two scenes.
That's right. Though he does get brought back later, for the Animal House title cards to say what happened to him. So this is the part where is it Bruno Guido tells the story about his uncle? This story that doesn't make any sense. Do you guys remember this part?
Yeah.
Yeah.
So the point of the story is you never know what's going to get you, so don't worry about when you're going to die. But which doesn't make any sense though, because it's like, but then don't do stuff that's dangerous.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, like you don't know what's going to get you, but you can try not to do dangerous things.
But that's what his point was, is that his uncle was doing all these dangerous things, and then he just got hit on the sidewalk when he was walking on the sidewalk.
Right. I understand that.
It's a denial of your weird statistics-based version of safety,
That's
Zach, which is clearly worse than the anecdotal version of safety.
Makes perfect sense.
Oh, yeah. So we also get here Best giving his first briefing as skipper of Bombing 6. And he says he's going to double up scouting flights and we're going to practice more bombing runs.
He reiterates the stakes.
Yeah. And this new kid recruit comes up to him. He's not confident. And Best is not good at giving a pep talk. But that's all right. You know what? Kid, you're going to be my wingman. So stick with me. I'll take care of you.
Mm-hmm.
So we have the scouting mission and they practice a bombing run. But the ship is moving too slowly, so when Best takes off, he almost goes in the drink.
Mm-hmm.
But the kid does go in, and the plane is hit by the battleship's bow and sinks. The sinking did not look great.
Well,
no, the sinking didn't look great.
Yeah, the emotions was good though.
Yeah.
And this isn't the only scene, but where there's attrition, where the pilots die in accidents, it was really dramatic because it's like they're losing people they can't afford to lose.
Yeah.
The planes as well. So everyone was alive.
Nimitz is giving medals to Sailor, and he goes to see Halsey, and can tell that something is wrong, so he gives him direct order, report to sick bay, and
report to sick bay always makes me think of Star Trek.
Yeah.
So they finally finish this rash conversation after one more argument.
Yeah.
And we get the stakes reiterated by Best.
Mm-hmm. And we see a scene with him back at home with his wife, telling her about, the kid and how he died. The kid died under his watch, and how he feels guilty about that.
Yeah, speaking of Star Trek, we get a very Scotty scene with the Yorktown.
Oh yes, yes.
Which is
Nimitz
nice.
is visiting the Yorktown, and you can see a giant hole in it.
Yeah.
And it says, "All right, I need it ready in 72 hours."
That's right. Put wood on the deck if you have to.
Yeah, yeah.
Mhm.
And tells all everyone else that Halsey is out and Spruance is in.
You mentioned a couple times characters who appear in like 2 scenes.
Yeah,
The Yorktown appears in like 2 scenes. It pops
Yeah.
up here and they say, all right, get it back out there in 72 hours. And then a little bit later, it pops up and they're like, hey, it's the Yorktown. And then a cheer goes up. And then near the end of the movie, they're like, well, the Yorktown's saying. Like
I said before, I think because we have the benefit of having watched the other movies, so we have a better idea of all these other events that are happening.
yeah.
But yeah, you're right. I think
It's hardly even glossed over. It's essentially ignored.
Yeah. It's okay for us, but for your general audience, especially folks who have no idea about anything about the Battle of Midway, they're gonna be confused. Like, all right, what's that? Yeah, what's the significance of that?
Yep.
One of the other commanders or admiral asks Leighton, how reliable are these estimates, or do they represent our best guess? So I was like, well, I can't work off your best guess. I need you to be specific. So here's where I think we talked about this last week, ZJ.
Yes, we did, and I was happy to see this in here.
Where he gives like the exact times, dates, and degrees of when the fleet will be there.
Yep, but I think also that this wasn't just he didn't have to be pressed for this information. That he had pulled an all-nighter the night before to be able to come in and tell them this exact info. Based on their assemblage of all these reports. So I think it kind of it makes it seem like he's guessing in a way. When I think that he very much had worked incredibly hard to be able to put this picture together to present.
Yeah. So. Interesting. I think there's probably a way to make have the best of both worlds, to still have the drama of that scene, but also make it clear that he's not just guessing here.
Yes.
Maybe instead of just saying just straight out he's going to arrive, it's like, okay, based on our intelligence, he will arrive. Even just adding that just part there, it would make it work.
Yeah.
Are back on the Enterprise where there's a plane coming in for a landing, but the landing gear doesn't come out all the way, so there's a crash. It's Darren Criss, aka Lindsay, who's injured but still alive.
I did also want to point out, and this goes back a couple of scenes, but when they say we're the only aircraft carriers left in the Pacific, and they show the other ships sinking, this was part of they had a limited number of models that they were 3D models they were able to afford, because it's the Lexington that's sinking at this point, but it's a Yorktown class aircraft carrier model that is sinking. So they clearly took the aircraft carrier that they built and were like, well, we'll have it sink in this shot.
Very specific. Good eye, though.
So it's interesting because it's almost the opposite of what we saw in the last film. The last film, they couldn't keep the ships or the planes straight between 2 shots. And this one, they've only got 3 types of planes and a few types of ships. So.
McCluskey is briefing the squadron leaders, and then Bess asks McCluskey if he believes the intel. This is where Bess needs a pep talk now, and like McCluskey's like, I hate to say it, but I liked you better when you were cocky.
Yeah, corridor pep talk.
If you know history, that's where it's supposed to be the inspirational moment of it's a ship sighted. It's the Yorktown. Woo!
Well, yeah, I mean they got the repairs done.
Yeah.
Yep. So we do know where it came from and why they're excited.
Yeah.
It's not out of nowhere.
Leighton is working late. Nimitz tells him to go home, but he says, no, I think I should spend the night there. They have a talk about their wives.
And what's the line that he says? My wife knows the routine, but that doesn't mean she likes it.
Yeah.
That's right.
So it is June 4 on Midway. The Marine captain notices that they've scrambled all the squadrons. And Ford is filming his the flag raising. He's repeating it to make it look good.
Just like on Iwo Jima.
Yeah.
And I think that there's actually a if you guys haven't watched the Ford Midway documentary yet, it's good.
Which one is that?
I mentioned it last time. It's a 20-minute long Midway Battle of Midway John Ford documentary that resulted from all this filming he's doing. It's great. It's also only 20 minutes long.
Yeah.
And I think that they have that exact shot of the flag raising while the guys playing bugles. So,
Of course, you have to. It was on Midway.
Did it win an Academy Award?
I think
I believe so.
Yeah.
And if I recall, that is the Oscar that is at the Spy Museum. It's for that.
Yes.
That would be interesting.
Yeah, I believe so. So we have Best trying to give his men a pep talk again. Says that we're underdogs, but we're gonna do this. It looks like Dickinson is like about to say something in response, but instead he says, "We're gonna give him a shellacking."
Well, finally, some 1940s era dialogue, terminology.
Yeah. So we got incoming aircraft to Midway, and they're trying to get Ford to get into cover, but instead he heads to the roof. Keep shooting this film.
Keep filming.
Yeah.
While they're running for cover.
Mm-hmm. So we are back at Pearl, where we get a report of the Japanese fleet. Apparently, Leighton was off by 5 minutes, 5 miles, and 5 degrees.
Yeah, so we don't get Strawberry 5 here. But
Nope.
I don't need all of the different bombing groups and scouting groups and everything else. No. Like, sure, I think for this movie, it makes sense just to do that.
Yeah.
Do what
Zach,
they do.
I know that you weren't saying this as a complaint, but I just like the idea that you're like, we're getting all these worthless character moments. Where is Strawberry 5?
I like them. They were the center of the haiku last time.
That's true.
They do a good job explaining the first attack is like amateur hour.
Yeah.
They do a really bad job.
Yep, and I think that they did a better job of describing and portraying that attack in this film than in the last one.
Yeah.
I do think that we have a glaring omission of any American fighter aircraft through the entire film.
Yeah.
If you watch this film, you'd think that the Americans didn't even know how to build fighter planes. Whereas in the last one, you would have just thought that they built bad fighter planes, closer to the mark. But yeah, they talk about specifically the glide bombing rather than dive bombing. And I believe that the Marine commander of this Dauntless unit that was flying out of Midway, he knew how to dive bomb. But he had a bunch of green pilots under his command who he knew couldn't pull it off. And so he chose to go in with this other attack angle that they could actually pull off. And as a result, they were just absolutely decimated.
That's right. It's sad. It's hard to see.
Yeah. But, and this is another kind of Hollywood-esque thing. So they show the level bombers, the B-26s. 20 of them or something in these shots. There are like multiple formations of them flying overhead. In actuality, there were 4 of them.
Oh, huh.
And I thought that this was a perfect example in this movie of how they just take, whatever number happened in real life, and then you've got all these extra ones going in, and all these extra ones blowing up, and all these extra. It just kind of, I'm surprised that they didn't sink 8 Japanese aircraft carriers or something just to make it more exciting.
So extra.
But, yeah, exactly. Anyway, I just think that they could have had 4 of them and had it still be a perfectly good film.
No, fair enough.
Anyway.
Yeah.
There's an exciting part with an American kamikaze.
Because when did kamikaze pilots start being a thing? No
44,
later, right? So
44.
like you see, the American pilot, dive bomb a Japanese carrier with just the plane itself. And you see the Japanese like, what such bravery. Like, is this supposed to be like, all right, this is where they got the idea from?
No, I don't think so. But I think it's supposed to be kind of we got, I think, more of this in the last movie where they're like, oh, the Americans are, indolent, incapable of acts of bravery and sacrifice.
Yeah, one of them even says Americans aren't brave enough to do that.
Oh, yeah, that's right. There was, yeah.
So that was cool.
Yeah.
But yeah, there's a lot of near misses in this movie. A lot.
Yeah, so we see Lindsay, having previously been injured, is still limping out to his plane, and Beth's like, no, you're in no condition to fly. He's like, I'll meet you at the Japanese fleet.
That's right.
I think is also an interesting thing is that I believe that the American squadrons kind of like take off and then start towards the Japanese fleet, and then the other ones were supposed to take off and kind of go the same direction. And what ended up happening is that the torpedo bombers got there well before the dive bombers did.
That's right, yeah.
And the torpedo bombers just all got shot down because it wasn't a coordinated attack between all
Right,
these
and that's what we
different
saw
units.
in the last Midway movie. I remember that.
Yeah.
Oh, yeah, that's right. Is McCluskey the one who was supposed to be like part, Native American? No, someone else wasn't it?
John Waldron.
That's right. Who is not in
commanded,
this? Yeah.
Torpedo Squadron 8 from Hornet, I believe.
Okay.
I
I remember McCluskey was mentioned in the previous one, but I don't remember what and he was like, yeah. Anyway, so we have a Japanese pilot who sees the American fleet. Command gets the message, and at first they don't believe as I guess unless it's a trap. And this is where we get talk about switching the weapons from torpedoes to bombs, or no, vice versa, bombs to torpedoes.
Well, it's both. From high explosive bombs
okay.
to armor-piercing bombs and torpedoes.
Got it. Okay.
Yeah, this whole drama again.
They're going to be vulnerable. And then here's something that's like, I don't remember being in Midway 1976. The submarine.
Yes, but it's a good detail.
Yeah. So there's the USS Nautilus. They're, 250 miles northwest of Midway, and they spot one of the cruisers. And they're looking for the carriers, and they man battle stations.
Mm-hmm.
That's right.
And Best and McCluskey ready for takeoff. And back at Pearl, they're getting reports of what's going on in Midway. So it's all sort of montagey. And Best is up to 14,000 feet when they put on their oxygen, and he's got a bad mix of oxygen.
Yeah, this was an interesting one too, where it's like, oh no, sacrificing himself again.
Yep.
Yeah. So the Nautilus finds the carrier, but once they find the carriers, the Japanese spot the periscope and launch depth charges.
So we get submarine action, which I was not expecting.
The torpedo that the Nautilus launched just misses one of the carriers, or one of the ships at least. I don't remember if it was a carrier or
but
destroyer.
It probably would have just bounced off of it anyway.
But yeah, so Best and McCluskey, they don't see the fleet. We get some more depth charges fired at the submarine. Lindsay has found the fleet, but like you said, he's not with the with the other bombers, and it's just the torpedoes, and so they get taken out quite quickly. And then we see at one point Lindsay's wing is on fire, and he just sort of accepts his fate.
Yeah.
McCluskey's spotting a destroyer going at flank speed, which is, very fast.
Right. So they're like, hey, what's up with that?
Yeah, so they go in, follow it to the carriers. Best follows McCluskey, and...
Well, they don't actually follow the destroyer, because that would be very slow. They say the destroyer is probably going directly
so they
towards
go with
the fleet,
so
that's
right.
Flying ahead of it.
I see. Thank you,
That's right. Thanks for that correction. And then here's where I made my notice. Oh, I guess they're doing the Ensign Gay thing.
Mm-hmm.
That's right.
The guy who was, bailed out and stuck, just in the water for the entire attack.
Yeah.
And the Japanese can't launch their bombers. Yamaguchi wants the attack to launch now.
Yeah.
And now Best sees the fleet, and he goes in for the dive. Apparently McCluskey doesn't go for the right carrier, so Best has to adjust.
Another example of just how over the top they make all these shots.
Yeah.
The Japanese fleet has 3 Yamato class battleships in it.
Wow.
In this shot. The Japanese only built 2 of them.
Oh.
And neither of them were with the fleet at this action. So it's just kind of they take, I think in this case it's probably that they just had to reuse these models. That's
what I'm thinking for at least this case. But yes, I agree.
It just bothers me that they keep being like copy paste, take the action that happened, then copy paste it 3 or 4 times, and then that's the number of bullets flying. That's the number of planes flying. Anyway, yeah.
Totally.
Yeah. So McCluskey drops his bomb, but he misses. But Dickinson gets a hit.
More Americans are getting killed, which is always hard to watch.
Oh yeah.
Mm-hmm.
And then Yamaguchi sees that the Soryu is under attack, so now it is just them and the Akagi.
Anti-aircraft continues to be super effective. We
Yeah.
mentioned that before.
Yeah. So Best is going on for his run, and it's just him and 2 other planes. And
So this is
Yeah.
actually a detail I really appreciated that
Yeah.
they threw in there. Is Best is going down for his attack run,
Uh-huh.
and then they're like, "Wait a minute, McCluskey's going for this carrier too. He's
Yeah.
supposed to be going for that other one."
Uh-huh.
And so U.S. dive bomber doctrine was basically they had whatever number of squadrons they're attacking, 2 squadrons in this
Yeah.
case. The doctrine is that one of the squadrons, but like I think McCluskey's squadron is supposed to go for the further aircraft carrier,
Right.
and
Yep,
Best squadron is the second squadron is supposed to go for the closer aircraft carrier.
Mhm.
But when Best goes over, and McCluskey, it's mentioned earlier, is not a dive bomber pilot.
No. Yep.
And so he goes for the closer aircraft carrier, not knowing or not remembering
Yeah.
this doctrine in this case. And so Best, along with his wingmates, pull out of their dive
Mhm.
Mhm.
because they don't want to just all attack the same aircraft carrier
Right.
and go for this other aircraft carrier. And then coincidentally, in the background, one of Yorktown's bombing squadrons hits the Soryu in the background.
Yep.
Mhm.
Yep.
And that is just a coincidence that they arrived at that same time.
Yeah.
Yeah, I really appreciated that detail because it's a very clear one, and they I think made it. He at least tossed out the line that, hey, this guy's supposed to be attacking the other one and isn't, so we'll go do that.
Yeah. The Best, wingmen, as they're going on their dive bomb run, drop their bombs earlier than Best. They both miss. Best drops his at less than 1,500 feet and is a direct hit. And
Nice.
I like here that as he's pulling out from the dive, you see a nice little wing splash like in the water.
Yep.
Yeah, and then Bruno gets a kill. Why is he in an airplane? Did they explain
What?
that?
Bruno Gaido?
Yeah.
He's a gunner.
Well, I thought he was an engineer's mechanic's mate. Why is he
Yeah,
a gunner?
that's what you call your gunners.
Okay. I didn't understand that. That's why we have you here, ZJ.
Japanese fighters are chasing Gaido's plane. McCluskey's nearby. He gets hit in the shoulder, but flies on.
Mhm.
We see, the Japanese scout is out of fuel.
It's so sad. That's
We see a carrier explode, but Nagumi doesn't want to leave.
Mhm.
Nimitz is, concerned about everything that's going on, but then Leighton gets a message from Rochefort, and so he shows it to Nimitz, where it says that Admiral Nagumi is transmitting from a cruiser, not from the Akagi. Why? Because it's probably gone.
Mm-hmm.
And at this point, Yamamoto realizes the Americans knew, and that they need to figure out what they're facing. So here's where we get Bruno and his pilot, whose name is I don't remember his name. O'Flaherty. Not in the cast list on Wikipedia.
O'Flaherty.
Okay. But yeah, so they're in a life raft and they see a destroyer, but it's Japanese, and they're captured and brought up onto the deck where they're questioned, and Bruno asks for a smoke and tells them, I had a lot of friends at Pearl Harbor, so go F yourself.
That's right.
And is thrown overboard, tied to an anchor, and is killed.
This is very upsetting.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
You see, the zoom in on O'Flaherty, and like, all right, you're next.
Mm-hmm. Well, spy fact versus spy fiction.
Yep.
In reality, he was tortured first.
Yeah, there's a little bit of differences. So this Japanese actor looked familiar here, but I couldn't figure out where I knew him from.
Okay.
He's just one of those faces.
Yeah. So we see the last Japanese airborne unit, and they're totally the last one, so we have to make it count.
Mhm.
McCluskey and Best go to report. We find out that the Yorktown has been hit, and they give the report to Zitzbrunz.
Yeah.
Yeah. Right, it's not Halsey. It's Bruins that, bombed 3 carriers, there's 1 left, and McCluskey is sent to sick bay because he's, been shot.
That's right. And then we get Best's co-pilot won't go, even though he's been in action a bunch of times.
Well, not his co-pilot, his gunner.
Is Gunner, thank you.
Yeah, yeah.
And so he has to give him a pep talk. And I
Yeah.
thought it was funny that he needed a pep talk, but I appreciated that wasn't overly dramatic. So a movie
Mhm.
we have all seen is called Red Tails, also about pilots in World War II.
Yeah,
But I
yeah.
remember when it came out, it was criticized because there's a part where they're like, "Let's go get him! Let's go get him! Let's go get him!" Like it was like a football locker room.
I mean, I love that part.
I understand that, but people at the time that it came out didn't like it because
Huh.
it felt very modern. So I appreciate that they didn't do that in this
Uh,
movie.
I don't think there's an intel aspect to Red Tail, so there's not a chance that we'll cover it on this movie. But I do, you know, I enjoy that big, was it to the
Mhm.
last man to the last minute? We fight, we fight. Yeah, that whole part. I love that part. Anyways, back to
Yeah,
this movie.
and we get a little bit of here where he's like, "It's time for you to face the moment."
Yeah.
And he makes a really good point that's like, when you get old, when you talk to your grandchildren, are you going to
Yeah.
tell them that like you chickened out?
Well, no, he doesn't phrase that. He just says, "You'll remember this moment for the rest of your life." Now, that could be in the next, hour, or it could be,
That's right.
50 years from now.
Good point.
Yeah, but so Best is also doing his best to scrounge up some pilots because they have a limited amount of planes and even more limited amount of pilots.
Hmm.
But now the Japanese have a plan. They're going to draw the Americans into the range of their battleships.
Yeah, their plan is basically charge and hope for the best.
Yeah. So I see, Best and his pilots attack the last carrier. Best performs what I like to call the Wedge Antilles maneuver of, shooting at an enemy ship and flying through the explosion. Because
Yeah,
I'd
of
always
course.
remember Wedge doing that in A New Hope.
Yes, it's very Star Wars.
Yeah. But yeah, so Best is going for a dive. And as this dive is going on, Murray is, trying to keep Zeros off their tail. At one point, like, he is pulled upwards by G forces and he has to grab onto something. He grabs onto the gun by the barrel, which burns his hands.
Mhm.
Best, looking at the photo of his family, he's going as he's diving down. And I like how
So
he
dramatic.
drops the bomb right on the Japanese sun emblem on the deck of the carrier. It's a
Yeah.
nice big red target.
I always thought the dive bomber goes down, he releases it while he's diving and then pulls out, but this time he like pulls around and then drops it.
Yeah, that would be, you'd be correct, Zach.
Yeah,
Even I knew that.
it's because they wanted that, all right, we need
That
to
like
have him hit the
flying
target.
down the aircraft carrier and dropping
Yeah,
the bomb.
yeah.
It did look pretty sweet.
And he says, "Welcome to Midway."
Punch.
Wait, did he actually say that? He didn't, did he? No,
No,
he said
but
like,
this is a
this is
Roland
for
Emmerich
Pearl
thing.
or something like that. Yeah.
Yeah.
Which,
Yeah.
yeah, I also didn't love that one liner, but that's all right.
Yes, and also spy fact versus spy fiction, I suppose.
Yeah.
In actuality, the Hiryu was hit by 4 bombs in this attack. So it's
not
not.
well.
It wasn't a one-man show, although
Either
Dick Best is credited with hitting 2 aircraft carriers in one day,
Yeah.
which is
it is
rare
quite a
feat.
feet. Yeah, but yeah. So we're back with the American carriers. One pilot has a real rough landing coming in, and then we find out that Dickinson had to ditch. So he's coming out of the water.
Mhm.
But Dick Best has still not come back, and McCluskey, says that he's probably fine, probably just taking a victory lap, and then he's gonna get the line of "Men like Dick Best are the reason we're going to win this war," which definitely reminded me of the line from Pearl Harbor,
Of course.
which Doolittle, Alec Baldwin says about Rafe and Dan. He's like, "Lose this battle, but we're going to win this war. You know why? Because of them, because they're rare."
And yet, there's a lot of them too.
Yeah, yeah.
I also like that they have the guys walking the deck to like pick up all
Yeah.
the stuff.
Oh,
That's a
yeah,
nice little
yeah.
detail.
Yeah.
I thought it was weird that they ran towards the back where the aircraft was landing. That seems like it'd be a bad idea.
Okay.
Yeah. We also get a brief cutaway to Anne, Dick's wife, going to like another Navy wife's house, and they're like, "Any news? There's a big battle. We sound like we lost a lot of pilots." And she like says, "Oh, let me go powder my nose," and cries in the bathroom. Spruance gives the order to withdraw for the night, and Dickinson finally leaves the flight deck where he was waiting for Best, but then he turns around because he hears a plane, and we see that Dick Best has no fuel. He is bingo fuel, and he is coasting, and does a perfect landing, just like the one he practiced at the beginning of the movie.
Mhm.
Did you guys feel the emotion of this part? Because I did not. I didn't care for Dick Death.
Mm.
It didn't. I mean, it was like there was a little tension for me of, all right, is he gonna die like did last movie?
Mhm.
But then I remembered, oh wait, no, he had the scene where he practiced his exact maneuver, so tension was gone. And I was like,
It'll be
oh,
fine.
I have no idea if how true the landing was, but the physics of it just seemed off, just like they did in the beginning.
Yeah, I think that's more of a CGI issue.
Yeah. See that Bess is also sick from the bad oxygen mix he took in,
Mhm.
and we get Yamaguchi speaking to his men and told that, we must scuttle the ship, and if he's decided to go with his ship down with the ship, and his exo stays with him, and they said, let's enjoy the moon together. And one of the younger officers wants to stay too, but he's denied. Said, no, you need to go on, avenge us, basically.
Yeah, this
Mhm.
part was crazy. It was also very romantic when he said, "Let's watch the moon together."
Yeah.
Did this really happen though? Boy, I know
Yeah.
the Japanese are really into honor culture, but for an admiral to kill himself for no reason is like.
I mean,
pretty
he
wild.
viewed it as a failure on his part. So yeah, that mentality.
But he wasn't even in overall command.
That's true.
Mizumo was. So to answer your question, it is something that happened, and I think it's a bad idea.
Well, of course we do. We're Americans.
I think that Japan could have used someone of his caliber later in the war.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, safe to say.
See also Bruno's belongings being packed up, and like Marie asked, what happened to him? So, we sent someone over their last position. And we saw an empty life raft, so they assume he must be dead.
Yeah.
And we also actually get to see the scuttling of Yamaguchi's ship. I was like, wow, that's crazy.
Yeah, I like that.
And Yamamoto is told that the Americans have withdrawn. Here's where we get the dramatic scene where a signal is sent to Midway, and then we see the chain as it's brought to various people, and it finally gets to Rochefort, and then Rochefort brings it to Leighton, who drives to Nimitz, who tells them the Japanese are retreating.
Yay! Thank goodness.
What happened next to all these characters? And all right, here's a photo of the actor and then the real life person.
What happened next to these three characters? We only got
There's a decent amount.
I thought there were 5 of them.
All right, so Nimitz commanded the Pacific Fleet until the Japanese surrender.
Yeah.
Halsey became a fleet admiral. Yamamoto was shot down in the Solomon Islands after the naval code breakers figured out his itinerary. It's not a specific character, but it was the translator who helped out Doolittle. And you see him imprisoned and the lighter that Doolittle gave him. And then you see the Japanese killed 250,000 Chinese civilians for helping
Insane.
Doolittle.
Was it worth it?
Wow, that's crazy.
Mm-hmm. No wonder they don't like them.
That leads me to questions about the movie Pearl Harbor, as it does. ZJ, have you seen Pearl Harbor?
No, I haven't.
Yeah, not since you asked him 2 weeks ago.
Oh, that's right. I forgot. That's right. I was like, I couldn't remember. But anyways,
It's got to be a tradition. You ask me every time.
I'm going to spoil the ending for you. One of Ben Affleck and
Josh
Hartnett, one of them dies, in China after being shot down part of the Doolittle Raid, and you get the dramatic scene of his body being brought back to resolve, and you see one of them alive, one of them carrying out the body to resolve the love triangle, with seemingly how difficult it was to get out of there. There's no way they would have brought his body back.
Probably safe to say.
Probably not. Probably not until after the war. But.
Yeah. So no. Anyways, I was like, once you're basically portraying of how hard it was to get them out of there. It's like, there's no way that body's coming back.
Yeah.
All right, so we find about Doolittle that he got the Medal of Honor, and then the Doolittle Raiders had reunions until 2019, where the last of them passed away, which is, wow, that's, 2019. That's not too long ago.
No.
We find out that Dickinson became an admiral, and he had got 3 Navy crosses.
Right.
McCluskey eventually commanded his own aircraft carrier, and that Leighton stayed with Nimitz through the war and later wrote a book which detailed Rochefort and his codebreakers efforts during Midway.
Leighton's kind of nerdy looking in real life.
Yeah. He is no Patrick Wilson.
Nope.
A lot of real life people are pretty nerdy looking.
Makes sense.
we get a little bit of like best, in coming home in the wheelchair, and we find out that he inhaled caustic soda, so his lungs are shot, and he would never fly for the Navy again.
Mm-hmm.
But he won a Navy Cross and is one of 2 pilots, as of making this movie, to hit multiple carriers in the same day.
That's right.
And with that, our movie ends.
Wait, Christian, we have one last thing that I have to mention.
Okay, sure, go ahead.
This movie is dedicated to the Americans and the Japanese who fly.
Oh yes, that's right. Yeah,
that is very concerning, but we won't need to go into that anymore.
Hmm.
All right, so now is time for our spy fact versus fiction. ZJ, as our guest, would you like to go first?
I think I brought most of mine up while we were watching. Let me see here.
Okay.
So at one point, I think
Spy
while giving a
fact
pep talk,
versus
his
spy
bad pep
fiction.
talk, Dick Best says, not to mention the biggest battleship in the world, is like one of the Japanese forces arrayed against them. But I think at this point, the U.S. didn't actually know how large Yamato was, and that they didn't actually know until after the war that it had 18-inch guns. It was an incredibly successful Japanese. What would you call it? They kept it very secret, and the U.S. did not realize how large this ship was, and very fortunately never had to face it in surface combat.
Nice.
Well, at least not battleship to battleship. But yeah, I think that spy fiction here is that they know about the Yamato being the largest battleship in the world, and the spy fact is they almost certainly would not have known that at this point.
Yep. I've only got a few things. So one, continuing a tradition from last Midway movie, the Japanese slur counter.
Okay, not
This
too far.
movie
About this.
had 26 uses of that slur.
Oh, does that top Midway 1970?
Yes, it does, by
my goodness.
2, I think. I think that one was 24. So I found both, the transcript and the actual script, shooting script. Shooting script had 35.
Oh my goodness.
They cut some of them out.
Yeah. So I was like, oh, that seems unnecessary. This is from Wikipedia. Station Hypa, also known as the Fleet Radio Unit Pacific, or FRUPAC, was the United States Naval Signals Monitoring and Cryptographic Intelligence Unit in Hawaii in World War II. Now, the station took its name from the phonetic code at the time for H for Heiva, or Heia, Hawaii Radio Tower. And the precise importance and role of hypo in penetrating the naval codes has been the subject of considerable controversy, reflecting internal tensions amongst Navy cryptographic stations. And I haven't done research into that, but I'm kind of curious now reading what the controversy was.
Oh.
Yeah. No further information. I was like, oh, that's interesting. We see here mention of an eyes-only message. So it's eyes-only is jargon used with regard to classified information, whereas a classified document is normally intended to be available to readers with the appropriate security clearance and a need to know. An eyes-only designation, whether official or informal, indicates that the document is intended for a specific set of readers. As such, the document should not be read by other individuals, even if they otherwise possess the appropriate clearance.
That makes sense.
And then I also got something on Midway Atoll. So in the movie, this bothered me. On the when we first get to Midway, it says Midway Island. It's not an island, it's an atoll. So the definition of an atoll is a ring-shaped island, including a coral rim that encircles a lagoon. It's a limited amount of actual land.
Right.
So it would be Sand Island would be the actual island, right?
I think you're right, actually.
Sand Island and Eastern Island are the two.
Yeah, you're correct on that. Yeah. All right. Lastly, I have a little something about John Ford. So they never mentioned here, but John Ford was actually commanded the Office of Intelligence Field Photographic Branch. So he was actually part of the OSS.
That's right.
This is interesting. So his World War II service is the subject actually of a new short documentary called Filming Under Fire, John Ford's OSS Field Photo Branch. And that's as of March of 2024. I believe that the OSS Society created a short film about that, which I'd be interested to watch.
Nice. There was also this Netflix series called Five Came
Five
Back.
came back. Yeah, I also want to watch that. I haven't had a chance to watch that either. Yeah.
So I watched it and I was underwhelmed by it.
Oh,
Oh, really?
okay.
I liked it actually quite a bit. I thought it
All
was
right.
great.
Well, DJ, that's because you're you. I'm me.
Part of what I liked about Five Came Back, it gave me a whole new list of World War II documentaries to watch.
There you go. Okay, so I have a lot. My source is Nick Hodgers on History Buffs on YouTube. I highly recommend the channel. He had a lot of information, not all of which I was able to steal. I mean, borrow for this.
Present.
Yeah, so after the attack on Pearl Harbor, Japan expanded to an area 3 times the size of Europe and the United States combined, involving the Malaya Islands, the Gilbert Islands, Guam, the Philippines, the Hong Kong, among others. So they really demonstrated how effective airplanes were. The US were not able to stop them. Britain sent 2 battleships, the Repulse and the Prince of Wales, very advanced battleships, but they were immediately sunk by Japanese planes, and the British withdrew their eastern fleet to modern day Sri Lanka. So it just goes to show the Japanese were pretty much unstoppable. Now, Nick says, why did they think just hitting the U.S. at Pearl Harbor and destroying the remaining carriers at Midway would make the U.S. just give up? The U.S. is so much more powerful than them. And the answer is because Japan had done it already. In 1904, they attacked Port Arthur, which is a Russian-utilized port in China, making sure their declaration of war would arrive after the attack, just like at Pearl Harbor. So it wasn't technically a surprise attack, even though it kind of was. So they put Port Arthur under siege, and Russia was in trouble because they only had the Baltic fleet available, but they had to sail all around Europe, all around Africa, all around Asia to get there. And by the time they arrived, the Japanese were ready to ambush it and destroy it. So then Russia had no fleets left. They had to sue for peace and made peace on Japan's terms, with Teddy Roosevelt mediating between them. Now, as you guys may remember from our previous episodes about this, Yamamoto lost a finger in one of these battles against the Russians.
Right.
Not only was aware of it, but he had been there when they did it. So that was the logic behind hitting the U.S. hard early, and then the U.S. would just, in theory, give up.
Interesting. Okay.
I thought that was very interesting. ZJ, did you know that?
Well, I knew about Port Arthur and Battle of Tsushima, right?
Yeah, that's right. Oh, can't have anything past this guy. So the torpedoes, 9 out of 10 times the American torpedoes failed, and they didn't fix it until 1943. They either went off course, didn't detonate, or detonated too early. The movie is correct that they were never tested because it was too expensive to test them. The Bureau of Ordnance blamed the pilots for poor performance. They only had one test in 1929 where only 1 out of 2 succeeded. So the Yorktown was ready within 48 hours, even though they gave them 72, and was being worked on while it sailed out.
Wow.
Yeah. During the battle, the Yorktown was actually hit once, but the fire crews put out the fire. So then when the Japanese came back, they thought it was a different carrier.
And then they hit it again.
And then they hit it
That's
again.
right. I think
And then they
CJ
put it out
mentioned
again.
it. Yeah.
The Nautilus, the submarine, it was there, but it fired at a battleship and not a carrier. And the reason why the Americans spotted that destroyer was because it was late to catch up with the fleet, and it was late because it was going after the Nautilus.
Okay. Yeah. They never really connected those dots, did they?
I think that they did. I think that they said the Nautilus says, "Oh, look, there's that destroyer sailing off." And then McCluskey goes, "Oh, look, there's a destroyer. I bet it's heading towards the Japanese
I
fleet."
see. In my mind, I did not actually connect that.
Okay.
So I just, maybe it's a failing on my part of just like, because there's a lot going on. So I don't,
Maybe it's because I knew about this incident, so I mentally was like, "Oh, this is what they're doing," in a way that wasn't necessarily presented in the film as text.
Yeah,
that was cool. So last couple things, Nick says that after Nagumo decided to go after the U.S. fleet and he was changing the weapons, he needed 45 minutes to get planes ready, launch, destroy the American fleet, and win the war. But the Americans hit him first. So it was a 45-minute window.
Wow.
That the edge of the world turned on it. Nick also didn't like the dedication to the Japanese sailors at the end. He talked a lot about Japanese atrocities. I will not get into that. That's the subject of another story. The last thing I have is just a little bit about John Ford. So besides the World War II service, he won 6 Academy Awards for, one of them was for a movie I love called The Quiet Man, starring John Wayne.
Have I told you my stories about The Quiet Man?
That didn't you go to the place in Ireland where they filmed
Well,
it?
not only that, but I happened to go into a place that was selling, Irish wool because we wanted to get some sweaters,
Mm,
and it turns out the place we went to was actually the place that supplied all of the costumes for the Quiet Man.
very nice. Yeah,
And we
I
actually
think
they have like signed photos, and like even one of the sewing machines or whatnot that was used, to create a lot of those costumes was up on a wall.
but have you seen the movie?
I have not. It's on my list. It's on my list, especially after being, one being into the islands where that was filmed, and also the being happening to come into where a lot of the clothing had been made for it. So it's
Yeah.
on my list.
Okay, so why I forgot to mention, this is all from John Ford's Wikipedia page.
Hmm.
He also directed How Green Was My Valley, the movie that infamously beat out Citizen Kane for the best. Well, actually, I think he won Best Director for that, but
Okay.
How Green Was My Valley still won for Best Picture.
Yeah.
So he was present on Omaha Beach on D-Day.
Right.
John Ford was. Did you know that he rose to become a top advisor to William Joseph Donovan, aka Wild Bill Donovan?
I did not know that, but I believe it. Yeah.
Yes. And then his last wartime film was They Were Expendable in 1945, which was about America's disastrous defeat in the Philippines, told from the viewpoint of a PT boat squadron and its commander.
Interesting. All right.
You want to check that out?
Yeah.
Does
Zach.
that also star John Wayne, or
I don't think so,
Yeah.
but I'm not sure. He did work with John Wayne a lot. John Wayne is my grandfather's favorite actor, so I've seen a few movies with him.
Zach, did you ever finish the Young Indiana Jones Chronicles?
I barely started it.
Wow, the very last episode has Indy meeting John Wayne, or John Ford, and working on one of his pictures.
Oh, that's fun.
Yeah, so
All right.
some
so
fun edutainment there.
There you go. All right, so now it's time for our favorite quotes. DJ, as our guest, would you like to go first?
Yeah, sure. I had two, both involving Nimitz somehow. All right, so the first one was where Nimitz says, "I don't envy the new commander," and then they exchange a look, and he says, "It's me, isn't it?"
Love it.
Yeah, just like Woody Harrelson.
Yeah.
Anyway, and then later on, when he's visiting Rochefort, he says, "I didn't realize the U.S. Navy had so many trained codebreakers." And he says, "We don't. Most of these men were in the band on the California." I like that one as well.
Yeah.
I know we already talked about it.
All right, Zach, what do you got?
So at the end, I didn't like the dedication, as I've said a few times, but I did like when they say the sea remembers its own.
Right.
That was cool. There's a part where one Japanese guy says to another, "Calm yourself, you're an officer." And I like that because it was like the Vulcans in Star Trek. Like the guy was like, "We've been hit," and he sounds like a little bit excited.
Yeah.
And everyone's like, calm down, you're an officer. Pull yourself together, man. Somebody says, "Dick Best, it can't be that hard. You do it."
Right. That was McCluskey. Yeah.
Yeah. I thought it was cool when someone says, "Yorktown sails in 72 hours.
I think that was Nimitz, probably.
Finally, when they get in trouble, they send for the sons of bitches, which is said by Nimitz.
Yes, I got that one too. Yep.
Yeah. It was the more I think about it, the more I like it. The one from Midway 1976 that ZJ had, which was, "You go find Yamamoto and you chew his ass." I kind of wanted that to be in this movie.
Yeah.
That would have been cool.
So I've got a few. So I really liked. I think it was Yamaguchi who says it to Yamamoto in Japanese. Did you enjoy your visit to Hawaii?
Oh yes.
Ooh. And also, I think who was the CNO, Chief of Navy Operations?
I don't know.
Chief of Naval Operations, who gives Nimitz the job.
Oh, King.
Okay, yeah,
Admiral King, I assume.
And so he says, to Nimitz, "Welcome to the most difficult job in the world."
Yep. Which I feel like, how can he say that if President of the United States exists?
Also, Layton's wife says to Layton, "Does America winning the war really depend on Edwin Layton working himself to death?" And I got two from Nimitz here, about these are the intelligence quotes here. "I don't care if he consults coffee grounds about doing the boogie woogie, as long as the intel is good."
Oh yeah, boogie woogie sounds like kind of southern like.
Yeah, and he also says, "I'm not generally predisposed supposed to trust a bunch of tuba players led by a man wearing fuzzy slippers. But
It felt like that was for the commercial.
yeah. And then I don't remember who says this. Someone said, I think it's about Dick Best, but I'm like, I don't remember who says it. I guess every battle needs a miracle.
Yep.
Was that
So
when he
like-
comes back? I think.
No, it was
Maybe-
when what's it called? When Yorktown shows up.
Oh, that's what it was. That's right. It's not about Dick Best. That's right. Dick Best says that. Yeah. I guess every battle needs a miracle.
It's almost a miracle. Anything else, Christian?
Oh, I'm good.
All right, so now it's time for our ratings on a scale of 1 to 10 martinis, 1 being Avengers 1998 level bad, and 10 being even better than Mission Impossible Ghost Protocol. How would we rate Midway 2019? ZJ, as our guest, would you like to go first?
Ratings.
I would give it a 7. I thought that a lot of the CGI was pretty bad, but maybe it's just in relative to the last movie. I thought that the actual character arcs made some narrative sense. I really appreciated that they stuck to a lot of the actual history of these characters. They didn't invent people for the purpose of the film. And I appreciated that, when they did make CGI aircraft, they did a good job with the accuracy on those aircraft in general, and the ships in the background too. So yeah,
all right,
I appreciated those things.
That's
All
a
right.
ringing endorsement from ZJ.
Yeah, Zach.
So the first half of the movie I thought was pretty not that good. I just didn't like seeing Doolittle again, Pearl Harbor again. I didn't really care for the characters as much as ZJ did, but John Ford is in it, and the ending was pretty exciting, and I thought the battle scenes were pretty well done, even if the CGI is a little dodgy sometimes, so I'm going to give it a 6 out of 10. I thought it was pretty good.
All right. Now, I'm going to give this... Well, okay, you said 6 out of 10, ZJ... 7 to 10. I'm gonna split the difference. I'm gonna give it a 6.5. I definitely enjoy this a lot more than Midway 1976. Mostly because it is a it's telling a story, an actual story, as opposed to telling that these events in history happened by this place. Which is I've talked about my problems with Tora, The Longest Day, even A Bridge Too Far, and then 2 months ago's movie Midway 1976, where it's just like there's no there wasn't narrative arcs for these characters because it's real life, and real life doesn't always have narrative arcs. It just has events that happen, and so we're able to at least give us these narrative arcs for some of these characters, and really focus in on just say the naval aviation part of Midway and the code breaking part of Midway. Now, granted, there was less of the code breaking than there was in Midway 1976, but they at least had a real person doing taking part of it, and not the made up Charlton Heston character.
Good point.
Yeah, I
Good point.
was glad that they didn't bring a made up Charlton Heston character into it, because that just seemed vaguely insulting, given how many people are actually served in that.
Right. Now, Zach, I'm trying to remember. Were you there? It was a long time ago. I think when we went to the one of the times I went to the National Cryptologic Museum.
I've only been to the National Cryptologic Museum once, and it was not with you.
I went there, and they have this whole thing about Code Purple, about the breaking of the Japanese codes, and also that whole thing about Midway. And I was talking to one of the docents there, and he was talking about how he liked the new Midway bit, which I was gonna be surprised about, because he's like, from the aspect of it, they actually have he said that they go into the codes. I was like, I don't think they go into the codes more, breaking here more, but they at least have the real people.
That's right.
As I've jokingly called this movie, Pearl Harbor 2.0, I also enjoy Pearl Harbor a lot, so that endeared it to me. Now, granted, Roland Emmerich, who did this movie and also did a lot of other movies like was it Day After Tomorrow, 2012, and of course Independence Day. He maybe doesn't have necessarily the visual flair that Michael Bay does, but he does an adequate job here, I'd say. And I'd say I enjoy this definitely more than Midway 1976. So
Nice.
6.5 out of 10 martinis for me.
Very good. All right. Well, DJ, thank you for joining us. I know you don't have anything to plug, so I won't ask at this point.
All right. Well, thank you all for joining us. You can find us on social media at the Spy-Fi Guys on Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, and YouTube, as well as you can find our merch store at redbubble.com. Until next time, I'm Christian.
I'm Zach.
And we are the Spy-Fi Guys, signing off.
Thank you for listening to the Spy-Fi Guys. If you enjoyed our podcast, please be sure to give us a 5-star rating on iTunes. The theme song from this podcast is Mistake the Getaway by Kevin MacLeod from Incompetech.com, licensed under Creative Commons by Attribution 3.0. Films, books, and television shows reviewed by our podcast are the intellectual property of their respective copyright holders, and no infringement is intended.
This is a personal podcast. Any views, statements, or opinions expressed in this podcast are personal and belong solely to the participants. They do not represent those of people, institutions, or organizations that the participants may or may not be associated with in a professional or personal capacity unless explicitly stated. Any views or opinions are not intended to malign any religion, ethnic group, club, organization, company, or individual.
You can find our podcast on social media at The Spy-Fi Guys on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram.